So our next speaker is Dan Kovalik. Dan teaches international human rights at the University of Pittsburgh's School of Law. And he writes an enormous amount about Nicaragua, including Nicaragua, a history of US intervention and resistance, and of course also about Venezuela, including a book called The Plot to Overthrow Venezuela, How the US is Orchestrating a Coup for Oil. This book also included a foreword by Oliver Stone. Dan has served as the in-house counsel for the United Steelworkers for 26 years. He has been traveling to Nicaragua since 1987 and has been a friend of the Nicaragua and the Sandinista Revolution since that time. His writings have appeared in a number of different platforms, including the Huffington Post, Counterpunch, and RT. So Dan, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here. I'm very excited about Carlos's book, which I do think is critical at this time, as we really are heading towards a possible war with China. It's very clear that the neocons in the White House want a conflict with China. And why? Because as some of the folks pointed to, the U.S. has decided it just can't outcompete with China anymore. I recently wrote an article using Sputnik as kind of an analogy. When the Soviets put the first cosmonaut into space, John F. Kennedy responded saying, "Oh, we got to teach, our kids better science, and so that we can put a person on the moon by the end of the decade, because we got to outcompete the Soviets." Now we just decided we can't compete, right? So we're just going to attack our competitors like Russia, like China. And that's a very scary prospect. When I think of China, I always like to think of this story, and it may be apocryphal, but it's a great story anyway. The story goes that when Nixon visited China in 1972, he asked Zhou Enlai, he said, "What do you think about the French Revolution?" And Zhou Enlai was said to have responded, "Too soon to tell." And that really, I think, encapsulates the Chinese view of history, that history's long. China looks to play the long game. They look at their own development many years into the future, not just, for short-term profit today. And that's what really distinguishes China, I think, from the West, and in particular the United States. And that's why China's winning and the US is losing, frankly. And I think, by the way, as socialist and communist, we have to be willing to accept victory as much as defeat. I think many times socialists in the West are defeatists, right? We always look at the losses we've had, and we've had losses, but we've had many victories. And right now, China's winning. We should be happy about that. We should embrace that. And again, I think in many ways, because they see the big picture in a way we don't. And I think a lot of us, including myself, in the 80s, we were, shocked and didn't understand what China was doing by embracing some capitalist, forms of economic structuring. And we saw this as, a move away from socialism, when in fact, I think it was a move to allow China to survive. And China did survive in a way the Soviet Union did not. Let's face that. In many ways, I think China has proven to be a durable, socialist country. And that's what Carlos points out in his book. And again, when you look at the victories, where China was when the communists took power in 1949 and where they are today, there's no comparison. It's the most incredible leap of development the world has ever seen. They took a backwards peasant country and now have made it the most technologically advanced society on earth. That is not a small feat. As Michael Parenti points out, when the communists entered Shanghai in 1949, 20% of the population, 1.2 million people, were addicted to opium. right? And that was done intentionally by the British, right? Can you imagine the societal issues that the Chinese had to deal with to advance that country? And they've done it, and that is something that is very exciting. Another quote that I think is very critical to kind of meditate on is that of Jimmy Carter, who had a conversation with Donald Trump. When Donald Trump was in office, he called Jimmy Carter, wanted to talk about China, the problem with China. And Jimmy Carter said, China hasn't been at war since 1979. The US has been at war almost every year of its existence since the beginning of the Republic in 1776. And he said, China has speed trains. He says, where are your speed trains? And of course, that was a rhetorical question because we don't have any speed trains. And Carter's point was, we don't have any speed trains because we're spending all of our money on war. And of course, that is true. And that is a very profound, I think, analysis of events that, China's put all its money into technology and lifting hundreds of millions of people out of poverty while the U.S. has wasted all its money on war. While our cities collapse, and they are collapsing, China is building cities, building green cities, helping other countries build cities, build hospitals, build rails. And yet China's begrudged for this. Every speed train is seen as some sort of violation, right? When China was helping countries out with vaccines during the pandemic, the US derided their vaccine diplomacy. What's wrong with vaccine diplomacy, right? The US has chosen, instead of building, it has decided to destroy through war, destroy countries like Libya and Iraq and Afghanistan and Serbia and Somalia and Yemen. And China has helped build these countries, right? That's the difference between the two societies and the two systems, which are very significant differences. And that's why we need to defend China. And that's Carlos's point. It's not just, again, one imperial power versus the other. I think it is one socialist country versus a very aggressive imperial system, especially in the United States. And I think that, as was pointed out at the outset of this discussion, there is a problem in the US and the Western left with socialist idealism and this idea that a country has to be perfect for us to support it, which has resulted in Western leftists not supporting any country. I have friends who think socialism didn't succeed except for in Russia till the summer of 1918. Why would you be a socialist? I mean, that you're just worshiping failure, right? And I don't think it's been a failure. I think socialism is succeeding. I think China is showing that it can succeed. Has it made concessions? Absolutely. Has it sometimes taken one step forward and two steps back, like Lenin talked about? Like during the new economic policy of Lenin in the Soviet Union, of course, but always to maintain socialism. And that's what we have to keep our eyes on. So I think this book is very important. I think we need to organize around it. I think we need to organize people in the West to oppose the coming war with China. And I am certain China would cooperate with the West on any issue they wanted to, including climate change and other issues confronting our world. And we need to demand the West to have a cooperative relationship with China, not a violent and aggressive policy. So thank you, Carlos. Thanks for everyone for being on this call.
I'm Michael Hudson. I'm appearing here for the International Manifesto group. If you like this video and ones like it, please subscribe. For more information, go to the address on the screen.